Since arriving in Germany, I can't quit noticing how differently men in Europe dress compared to what I am used to in the States. Living in one of the more conservative parts of a conservative state only highlights this difference. Men in Texas and in the United States generally give little thought to how they look and dress in public. Informality is more often the rule than not, unless you're dressing up for a specific purpose. In Europe, I've seen several men in their 60s perfectly matching their pastel pants to their pastel scarves or jackets. The cut of men's clothing is also invariably skinnier than in the States, regardless of age. Whereas American men want big muscles, European men seem much slighter in build. Style for men here in Germany appears to be quote-unquote more sophisticated than the States. So why is this? Germany and all of Western Europe is a place that has been more urbanized for longer than the States have been. Therefore, it makes sense that trends for men would be more metropolitan and, in my mind, perhaps more modern. The States are more rural and suburban, explaining a preference to a more rustic and rough look among men to express their masculinity. I recognize that there are vast geographic and historical differences between the old and new worlds. However, by the standards I've grown accustomed to, they appear slightly effeminate. Mostly, I have observed that these effeminate traits in white European males, which leads me to my observations about differences between Turkish men and German men. Turks and other immigrants began flooding into Germany in the 1960s looking for work after the Wirtschaftswunder. These immigrants were typically more conservative and patriarchal than the Germans that were already living there, keeping in mind that the Germans had just rebuilt their country largely thanks to women, the Trümmerfrau, and had experienced an anti-establishment women's rights expanding movement during the 1960s while immigrants were flooding in. Compared to Germans, the immigrant population seems to adhere to a more, by my standard, traditional expression of masculinity. Turkish men appear to value big muscles and carry themselves in a more intimidating and masculine fashion, more like American men. Their dress is looser, and generally their appearance is rougher compared to the clean and well-groomed Germans. These trends pop up time and time again. However, despite this, one can definitely see that many immigrants, particularly the younger ones, are becoming more integrated into German trends and fashions than the older crowd, perhaps reflecting a higher degree of assimilation. At a party recently, I met a 27-year-old German man. We spoke on several topics, most of it standard chit-chat, until he asked me where I was staying for my study abroad this summer. I told him Auerberg, and immediately his eyes widened. I told him that Auerberg seemed like a very Turkish part of town, and he agreed and said, very much so, and that he did not like to go there. When I asked him why that was, he began to explain to me that he didn't like Turkish men because he thought that they acted overly masculine, and in his words, like such big men. As a typical German man, he found his Turkish counterpart to be old school. I asked if perhaps Turkish men found Germans to be overly effeminate in their dress and mannerisms, and he replied perhaps. This was very interesting to me. My observations about how German and Turkish men express their masculinity differently now has some anecdotal proof. The performance of gender roles in different societies across the globe is a subject of interest for myself. So far, my time in Germany has given me ample opportunity to make observations about performance of masculinity in Germany, and in particular, the discourse in a multicultural society over what it means to be an echter Mann. Perhaps this is a topic that can be discussed more in depth at a later time.